Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the Tulsa Regional Chamber's first legislative briefing breakfast of 2021. I'm Mike Neal, President and CEO of the Chamber. For those accustomed to attending past breakfasts in person, we regret not being able to see one another and touch one another this morning in person, but we're really delighted that you made time to join us virtually. We're now 2 weeks into the Oklahoma legislative session, which is already proving to be extremely busy. It's our pleasure to be joined today by Speaker of the House, Charles Mccall, House Minority Leader, Emily Virgin, Senate President Pro Temp, Greg Treat, and Senate Minority Leader, Kay Floyd. I don't see Leader Virgin's smiling face on your computer screen right yet this morning. Please know she'll be joining us momentarily after she wraps up a meeting with in her home district of Norman, Oklahoma. We will collect questions submitted through Zoom's chat feature, so please feel free to submit your questions now and during our conversation this morning. But before we go any further, I'd like to thank the generous sponsors of our legislative briefing breakfast series, including several individuals from these sponsor companies with us today. Our presenting sponsors are the George Kaiser Family Foundation, One Gas, represented by Curtis Dinan, Chamber Board Member and Senior Vice President and Chief Commercial Officer, Osteopathic Founders Foundation, represented by President and CEO Sherry Wise, and TTCU Federal Credit Union, represented by Dan Newberry, Senior Vice President of Lending and former state senator. Our gold sponsors are American Bank and Trust Company, represented by President and CEO Fraser Hinkey, Ascension St. John, AT&T, Oklahoma Aggregates Association, represented by Executive Director Deborah Youngblood, and the OSU Center for Health Sciences, represented by President Dr. Casey Schrum. And our legislative benefactors are Cox Communications, represented by Vice President and Tulsa Market Leader Roger Ramsire, the immediate past chair of the Tulsa Regional Chamber, Cherokee Nation Businesses, represented by Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation, Chuck Hoskin Jr., also a Chamber Board member. Community Care, represented by Josiah Sutton, Vice President of Marketing and Business Development. The Grand River Dam Authority, represented by John Weiskiver, Executive Vice President of Strategic Communications and State Government. Public Service Company of Oklahoma, represented by President and COO Peggy Simmons. Quick Trip, represented by Michael Junk, Manager of Governmental Affairs. And Tulsa Tech, represented by Tony Heberlin, Chief Communications and Economic Development Officer. Even though we don't have physical tables for today's event, please see our corporate table sponsors recognized on your screen, and thank you all for making this event possible. Remember, if you have a question for any of our panelists today, please type your question into the chat bar on Zoom. We'll be taking audience questions throughout the program. I'll now pass it over to my good friend, the Chief Administrative Officer of the Mid-America Industrial Park and the Chamber's Vice Chair of Governmental Affairs, David Stewart, to introduce our legislators. Dave.
Okay, thank you, Mike. It's an honor to join everyone today and to kick off our year of legislative initiative. We had about 200 registered for this, so it's obviously extremely important, and we appreciate all of our guests being here. I'm going to introduce our guests. Representative Charles Mccall currently serves as the Speaker of the Oklahoma House of Representatives. He was first elected as Speaker for the 56th Oklahoma Legislature and was re-elected to serve as Speaker of the 57th Oklahoma Legislature. He is the first Republican Speaker from southeastern Oklahoma, and Speaker Mccall represents House District 22 and was first elected to the House in 2012. Representative Emily Virgin is the Democratic Minority Leader. She represents House District 44 and was first elected to the House of Representatives in 2011. In addition to her role as Minority Leader, Representative Virgin also serves on a number of committees, including Appropriations and Budget and Higher Education and Career Tech. And as Mike mentioned, Leader Virgin may be joining us in a few moments. Senator Greg Treat is the current Senate Pro Tem of the Oklahoma Senate. He represents District 47, which includes parts of Oklahoma City, Edmond, Deer Creek, and Bethany. He has served in the Senate since 2011. Senator Kay Floyd is the Senate Minority Leader. She represents District 46, which includes parts of Oklahoma City. She was first elected to the Oklahoma House of Representatives in 2012 and to the Senate in 2014, where she focuses on improving our education system and working for Oklahoma's women and children. And thank you for joining us today. We always like to start with a little bit of an icebreaker before we get into the meat and potatoes of the discussion. So we spend a lot more time at home. And we'd like to ask each of you very briefly, what is one new hobby or even a guilty pleasure that you've discovered during the pandemic? And I have to tell you mine, just to give you a chance to think about yours, and it's just the right thing to do. So one night I bought a putting green, a 12-foot putting green, because I was just bored to tears. And the problem with it, I put it in my living room. So I putt every evening, and if I hear keep your head down one more time, I'm probably just going to blow a gasket. But anyway, I'll let you, Representative Mccall, Speaker, if you would give us a little idea of your take on that. Let me see, we need sound.
Speaker, you're still, yeah, you're unmuted now. You're muted again, Speaker.
That.
There you go.
There we go. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Thank you. Well, listen, if there's a silver lining to the pandemic, it's for me, it's just been the ability to have more family time. It's been great. I have 2 children, really young adults now, and one has been in college, is in his 3rd year, and one's a senior in high school this year. And we've got to spend more time with our oldest son here during the pandemic than probably the 3 previous years put together. It's been good to see communities pull together and adjust and help one another out during the economic struggles that everybody has individually and communities across the state have experienced. And it's also exciting now. We can start seeing the light in the tunnel as we emerge from this, I think, a stronger state. And we've learned a lot about ourselves, some changes that can be made and embraced going forward that I think will make us more efficient and stronger.
Very good. Thank you. How about you, Senator Treat?
You know, it's been fascinating. My kids love superhero movies, and I'm not really into them. So I've got a 13, 10, and 9-year-old, and they have started to force me to watch the Marvel series of superhero movies, which I get through about 2/3 of them, and I fall asleep at the end of the night. But that's kind of been our deal. And then the same guilty pleasure that most Americans had. I watched curiously every time Tiger King came out with a new episode back in the spring, and waiting for something like that to come out again.
Okay, thank you. How about you, Senator Floyd?
Well, I think probably the time with your family and with my family. I have family in Norman, I have family down in Texas, and family in California. And traveling to out of state to see them has always been tricky, and there's quite a few of the family in Norman. It would be a large trek for all of us to go. So we are actually spending a lot of time on Zoom calls. We did a couple of holidays via Zoom, and that wasn't our choice, but it was probably the smart thing to do. So just having that interaction, and it seems like when you don't have to drive, and sometimes you don't even have to get out of your comfy clothes, you're more inclined to jump on the phone or a Zoom call with your family. So that part has been nice.
Well, very good. Thank you all for sharing a little bit of personal time. Now we'll get into some deeper issues. We'll probably have 3 or 4 minutes on each question. We'd start out with you, Speaker Mccall. With the release of the managed care contracts, where does the state stand in the implementation of Medicaid expansion? and how do you think the legislature is going to respond?
That's a great question. And that's something that, the House is certainly looking, having further discussions on. I think it's no secret that historically in the House of Representatives, the House has been opposed to managed care. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty and questions about something new and something different. I'm not surprised that where we are today. Last year we had an agreement on a different healthcare plan, and unfortunately, it was opposed by the groups in the medical community, which kind of ushered in the managed care concept after the legislature adjourned. I think the House of Representatives is certainly talking about it. I think the reality on managed care is, unless the legislature has a supermajority in both chambers that wants to set a different policy for the state, it's very likely to stand. I think with the passage of State Question 802, although a narrow margin, the legislature has the mandate to fund the expansion this year by the end of the session. So I know there's currently an injunction on the managed care, is my understanding, but a third party has filed. We'll see how it all plays out, but there's no longer a time. There is a backstop on time now. We're going to have to fund the plan going forward. So that's the way I see it in the House Majority Caucus. I don't, once again, historically, that hasn't been the preferred approach. I still think a great majority of the members still feel that way, but they are, we'll continue to see how that plays out this legislative cycle.
Okay, very good. Thank you for those comments. Senate Pro Tem Treat, there's a lot of movement at the end of last session around economic incentives. And given the importance of incentives to economic development, how can we help preserve their functionality while still making needed updates? And the Department of Commerce has done significant work on this, as you know, from economic developers across the state with some recommendations. Some of those are simply process and updates, and then some are changes to actual incentives. Could you give us your perspective?
Yeah, Dave, I appreciate that question. And it's a complicated one because it's hard to know. The Incentive Evaluation Commission has done a good job giving us objective data. The Department of Commerce has given a lot of thought to this over the interim. And what my caucus would like to see is us to starve those programs that are not bringing an ROI and feed those that are bringing an ROI. And toward the end of last session, in the middle of the outbreak of COVID, 1595 sailed through, and the governor ended up vetoing it. Thankfully, on behalf of the Senate members that I represent, there was desire to have that, not because necessarily policy discussion. We have to have a policy discussion around economic incentives, but we voted on it with a misunderstanding of what the intent of that bill really was. And so we're very dedicated to trying to eliminate incentives that don't bring an ROI and that have no cap on them. We've got to have some assurance that we can afford them. The ad valorem every year, we think we've hit the top. We thought it was wind driving it all. And then you look at the driver, this time manufacturing has utilized it to a great extent. We've got to make sure we can afford it and that it has an ROI. We're looking at an exhaustive look along with the Department of Commerce on which one of those incentives really do bring new investment and allow companies that are already in Oklahoma to grow, and look forward to partnering with you to figure out which ones we should keep and which ones we should scrap.
Very good. Thank you. Senator Floyd, the next question. Governor Stitt identified education funding as a priority in his State of the State address. How does the legislature plan to address this without diverting necessary funding from our public school system?
Thank you, David. And Mike, if I didn't say thank you earlier, thank you to the Tulsa Chamber for hosting this event. I know we all appreciate it. The governor did outline an education funding and stated that it was a priority. You know, in Oklahoma, we're considered one of the most equitable education funding formulas, to have one of the most equitable education funding formulas in the country. But the problem is we come in every year and we start fiddling with the funding part of it. And it's not the formula that's a problem, it is the funding. So we're going to have to start getting dedicated revenue streams into the funding so that we can continue to grow our education base. It's messing with the formula is not the problem, is the problem, basically. It's like getting in a vehicle and it won't start. Well, it won't start because you didn't put gas in it, you didn't invest in it. That's what we've got with the funding formula. So our caucus is dedicated to trying to find dedicated revenue streams to get to the funding formula. We've got to increase per pupil spending for our students. We've got to bring up the salaries for our teachers and staff. That's the only way we're going to get to top 10. And I know that's what the governor's goal is.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to open that question up to our other members, and good to see you arrive and ready to go. Pro Tem, do you have comment on that same question about funding education?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a believer that the focus should be on the kids and educational attainment. So the governor's plan that he addressed somewhat in the State of the State of trying to make sure that parents have more choice and that we have flexibility in the education choice for our kids, I'm very much for. There's some bills working their way through the process here at the Capitol that groups both in the House and Senate have been working on. But it doesn't, the bills that are working through the process right now do not divert any money away from public schools. In fact, they keep them within the public school infrastructure and they just create competition within the public school arena. And so to ask to not divert money away from public schools, I think isn't what the reform that we're talking about at the Capitol this year is about. Now, I personally, Greg Treat, not speaking on behalf of my caucus, am very much for just wide open school choice. I believe parents and kids should have the best option. And I think it's a terrible thing that we keep kids locked into a failing school year after year just because where their parents can afford to live. But that's not what is working its way through the process here at the Capitol. That's not what the governor was talking about. He was talking about things like open transfer within public schools, and those things are working their way through the committee process these first few weeks of session.
And how about you, Speaker Mccall? Comments?
Yeah, thank you very much. And, one of the, I think in the governor's State of the State and talking about education, one of the things in terms of funding that he was referencing is the fact that he believes that there are roughly, there's roughly $200 million within the funding, education funding already that's being paid out on students enrolled at multiple school districts. I think he's looking at not diverting that $200 million somewhere else, but ensuring that that money is attached to the child, the student, where that student is going to school. I think you'll see the House this year, along with the Senate. We're looking at those education policies. For me personally, good policy works everywhere in the state of Oklahoma. We all have certain needs. I certainly respect the dynamics of my colleagues that live in the suburban, urban areas. For myself, I live in the rural parts of the state, have my entire life. But we're seeking to. I think everybody at the end of the day wants education to be strong in the state of Oklahoma. No question about it. We realize investments need to be made. I certainly think we don't need to discount any mechanism that might be considered to bolster education in the state of Oklahoma, to attract more dollars into it. I think the legislature is committed. We always make education a priority in every budget year. And I'm optimistic, returning back to session here, that the economic outlook and the fiscal outlook for this next budget is much stronger than anticipated. And I'm really looking forward, I'm optimistic about next week's meeting by the Board of Equalization to see what that actual certified number is that we have to work with for this next budget we craft this session.
Okay, thank you, and welcome Representative Virgin to the call. Did you hear the last question, or should I go to the next?
I didn't hear the question, but I can guess what it was about. So
it's fairly easy it's funding education. So I'll just turn it over to you. Welcome and thank you. I gave you a great introduction.
Oh, thank you.
So everyone knows about you. So I'll just turn it over to you to talk about funding education for a moment.
Yeah, so I appreciate everyone for being here today. I apologize for being a bit tardy. I was taking care of my Norman Chamber folks first, and then came over here to the Tulsa Chamber. The beauty of Zoom, I guess. So thanks for having me. And on education funding, I think that we still have a lot of work to do. Of course, we made a historic investment a few years ago, but in terms of per pupil expenditures, we do still need to be focusing on education funding, keeping up with those states around us. And I think it's important on the funding formula to make sure that we know why certain provisions were put into the funding formula in the first place. The so-called ghost students that Governor Stitt referenced in his State of the State and the funding mechanism that goes along with them, it's important to remember that was put into place to protect our individual school districts from having drops in funding from year to year, keeping them a little more stable, avoiding layoffs. And our funding formula is actually one of those that is held up across the country as a model. So I'm always hesitant to make big changes to the funding formula. To me, it feels like another way of going at something that's a little tougher to do. And that is simply appropriating more dollars to our education system. I know, like I said, that's tough, but that's what we need to do instead of fiddling with the funding formula and coming up with, some other gimmick to get more money to individual school districts. We need to be focusing on that per pupil expenditure number.
Okay, thank you for those comments. And I have a question for you specifically. We saved this question for you. Governor
good.
Stitt indicated that investing in Oklahoma startups is a priority, and there are several bills introduced. The Quality Investment Bill that aim to improve Oklahoma's low rankings on the available investment dollars for startups. Is there an appetite to champion these issues as they move through the legislature, from your perspective?
I think there absolutely is an appetite for that. We need to be focusing on those businesses that are already in Oklahoma and also those that could be started by Oklahomans. So I want us to not just look at attracting industry and business from outside the state, but focus on what we've already have in Oklahoma itself. But going along with that, and I think going along with any economic incentive, we have to make sure that we are keeping people here who might have that potential to start new businesses. And the way that we do that is focus on those quality of life issues. We focus on funding education appropriately. We focus on making more progress in criminal justice reform, access to quality healthcare. There are a whole host of issues that go into economic incentives and keeping those businesses here.
Thank you. And I have a question, and this is more of one that's on my mind, Senator Treat and Speaker Mccall. As we compete to attract business in Oklahoma, the funding for marketing Oklahoma at a time when we have, I think, a lot of opportunity to bring business from the East and West Coast, much easier to do business in Oklahoma. Do you see some appetite for being more aggressive in funding marketing Oklahoma outside the state to other companies, as has been done, I think, with the Department of Commerce. Senator Treat, your comment?
Yes, there's the appetite there to do that. It's the right time to invest. There's a real opportune moment to go into states that are not as business friendly, that have higher energy or higher electricity cost, all of those type of things that give us a strategic advantage in addition to just being located where we're at in the country. Yes, there is definitely an appetite. Obviously things have to work their way through the budget process and it has to balance out at the end of the day, but I think the appetite is definitely there.
Very good. Thank you. Speaker Mccall.
Yeah, I would agree with Pro Tem. Definitely an appetite for it. I think there always is, and you have to reassess every year where your opportunities are and where to position Oklahoma in the best place to attract industry and business and retain it as well. And I think you've seen Oklahoma be in on the top list of several companies. So I think when we reassess our situation, we need to be looking at what can make us more competitive with the states that we're losing out to. I mean, it's great to be on top 5 list of states to be considered, but if you're not number 1 and you don't get the company, then what do we need to do to be more competitive? I think Oklahoma finds itself in a good, strong position where companies are looking at Oklahoma. But in the central region of the United States, quite honestly, we just don't, our tax structure in the state of Oklahoma just doesn't stack up with some of the competitors. A lot of companies are looking at Texas, Florida, Tennessee, and all of those have more attractive corporate tax structures in the state of Oklahoma and personal income tax structures than the state of Oklahoma. And I think we have to reassess. I'm working on a bill to reform our tax structure in the state of Oklahoma and to change it over the course of a few years rather than just tomorrow, but to signal to business and industry that Oklahoma is going to be more competitive in those areas that we're not deficient. One thing within the state of Oklahoma that I personally also am introducing legislation this year is to work with the Department of Commerce. We get so many inquiries throughout the state of Oklahoma from companies of all sizes, and the Department of Commerce is the repository for that information. We have cities all across the state that have economic development infrastructure in place. They have incentives in place. Their local tax base is supporting economic development. And if everybody throughout the state had access to know what companies were interested in the state of Oklahoma without divulging their personal information, we could, I think, do a better job of connecting more business in the state of Oklahoma to cities throughout the state. So that's something I'm excited about. I think it's just a common sense approach to connecting industries throughout the state of Oklahoma. Obviously, in the rural parts of the state, they don't have the workforce or the labor supply for 400 or 500 jobs. It may be a 50, 100, 150 job industry that they're interested in. But we have to ensure anybody interested in the state of Oklahoma that we're making the connections and help facilitating their arrival and move to the state of Oklahoma.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those comments. That's really good to hear that we have an aggressive legislature to tackle. I appreciate that. And I know the chamber membership does. One question for Representative Virgin. There is a lot of buzz around the data privacy bill. And as the business community, we're concerned about the unintended consequence, excessive cost, potential regulatory burden it might have. What do you expect a state level solution to this, and maybe your just general comment on this subject? Representative Virgin. I think you're muted. Representative Virgin, are you there?
How about Leader Floyd?
Okay. Floyd. Which one of you would like to address that?
I'm going to take the Greg Treat answer on that one. The dialogue in the House has been where the buzz is, and so I'm really interested in hearing what the Speaker and Representative Virgin have to say.
Okay.
Greg and I
Sounds like
agree on this.
Sounds like we just threw the baton to you, Speaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, where did Emily go?
Right there.
Right.
But, yeah, well, happy to. I've pretty lively debate on this this week in the House. Listen, the bill is in response, and it has 40. Last time I checked, it had 41 co-authors in the House of Representatives. It's being advanced on a bipartisan basis, Republican House member and a Democratic House member. A lot of passion around this issue, a lot of emotion, and I mean, you can't deny that there's not an upswell among constituencies in the state of Oklahoma over data privacy. So this is, I'm not surprised at all that we have this piece of legislation. There was an interim study held this past summer on it, and I think it has a lot of momentum in the House, and you should probably ask the Senate what they're going to do with it, because I'm pretty sure they're going to get it.
Okay, well, we'll let that one hold. I'd like to see, we'll let you hold the baton on that one. And anyway, do we have questions from our audience that our staff at the chamber could coordinate? Where are we on that, Katie?
We do. We have quite a few questions. So I'm going to start with Tom McKeon, and he wanted you all to discuss how you're planning to support targeted funding to increase the number of graduates in high demand occupations, including engineering, nursing, and teaching.
Senator Floyd, would you like to handle that?
Certainly. Well, as discussed earlier, the budget is looking more positive than we thought it was going to, but it's still going to be a very, very tough budget year. And higher education is always a priority for the Senate. It's always a priority for my caucus. I visited with Senator Thompson, who's our appropriations chair, and he's looking at all options. I have some very impressive members in my caucus that were educators, Senator J.J. Dossett, Senator Carrie Hicks. We have a new member, Joanna Dossett, and they are letting our caucus know as they are tracking bills and looking at the budget as a whole. But we definitely need to continue our investment, not just in K through 12, but in higher education. And as I said earlier, we need to find the funding for that. That's good for business. As we expand our education, our system, that's what business is looking for. Business coming into the state wants to know if they're going to be able to send their employees' children to schools where they'll get a good education. They want to know if they're going to be able to depend on a workforce that's being generated from higher ed. And education is truly a business investment in the state of Oklahoma. And when we're budgeting for it, we need to keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you for those comments, Senator. And Katie, I'll turn it over to you for the next question.
Okay, let's see. David Blatt has mentioned that there are a lot of bills on elections and voting this session, including some to add new restrictions on absentee voting and to make it harder to get initiative petitions on the ballot. What do you all expect to happen on these issues?
Well, I don't know who to throw that one to. I'll leave it for you all to pick up as you deem appropriate to discuss that.
Well, David, since I left you hanging on the last question that you asked me, I'll go ahead and take a crack at this one.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you.
Sorry, Speaker Mccall. I'm sure you handled that data privacy bill very well. So on those elections and voting issues, I think there are a couple of different things to touch on. Number one, a lot of the bills that the House Democrats and the Senate Democrats have are focused on increasing voter access. Right now, we have one of the lowest rates of voter participation in the country, and those bills are seeking to increase voter participation. Right now, I think our focus has been a little too heavy on election security. And while that's important, we want our election system to be secure. We've got that side of things solved. Now it's time to focus on making sure that everyone who wants to vote is able to do that, because I think we get a better product when more people are involved in the democratic process. On those efforts to change the initiative petition process, I personally am disappointed to see those, because what we've seen in the last few years is that the big steps we've made in Oklahoma, whether it's criminal justice reform or healthcare, a whole host of other issues, those have come by initiative petition. And that is because the legislature failed to act on those issues. The voters decided to take those things into their own hands. So I think that the frustration that some of my colleagues have with the initiative petition process could be solved if the legislature tackles the important issues that the voters want us to tackle.
David,
Okay,
I'd like to weigh in on this if you don't mind.
okay.
On the voter access, we saw a lot of states this last cycle who didn't get it right. And it was a problem for some states. Oklahoma was not one of those. Our system handled the strain, an unprecedented strain on the whole process. When you talk to the election board secretary, Paul Zirix, he will tell you that we did fine. And some people have pointed to certain issues and asked if we had voter fraud. And Oklahoma did a very, very good job. Our election officials did a very, very good job. So we didn't have that in the state. If we can do that under the conditions that we were under, that's last election cycle, and trial by fire. I mean, the voter access issues, the absentee ballots with a photo ID instead of an affidavit signed, having it notarized. These things worked, and we didn't have an increase in voter fraud. So I think we've been able to try it in the field. We know that it works, and I think we need to continue to do that.
Thank you for those comments. We probably have one more question, Katie, from the field, if you want to address that.
Okay, so Mary Ogle would like to know, is it true that the Hospital Association offered to pay for a large portion of Medicaid expansion? So maybe just addressing funding for Medicaid expansion moving forward.
Okay, I'll throw it out to the field for comment. Okay, Speaker McCall, thank you.
Yeah, I think what you saw, I think the Hospital Association through a shop fee is definitely one of the mechanisms that the legislature considered last year in funding Sooner Care 2.0 and now State Question 802, which is the expansion in our state's constitution. That will be considered again, but that vote last year is what was the unwound Sooner Care 2.0. So I think that I hope that the hospitals, I think for the most part, understand that that's going to be one of the mechanisms we have to look at to fund this in a going forward. But it was, it's been last year. Our experience was it was mixed. So we look forward to those conversations, but the reality is we are going to have to come up with $150 to $200 million this year to fund the state question.
Okay, thank you. Katie, I think one more or so.
Okay, let's see. Odessa would like to know, could you speak about any upcoming incentives and credits towards green energy development initiatives in our state?
Okay, we have a volunteer to take that question.
We in the House, there are a few bills out there. We're talking. We're hearing from oil and gas in terms of helping their industry get back on their feet. The recent commodity prices are helping, but we're looking at ways to help not only oil and gas in the state of Oklahoma, but all business sectors throughout the state to get back, running on all 10 cylinders in the state. I'm very thankful that the governor kept the state open to the greatest extent possible that he could over the last months. That's really going to help our fiscal situation this year in crafting the budget. But I think you'll see very shortly a comprehensive plan to consider help for all of our businesses in the state, and while looking at our tax structure as well from the House.
Okay, any comment from our other guests on that?
David, I would add to that I'm glad that topic was brought up, because we talk a lot about, and I think Speaker Mccall hit on, looking at the reasons why we didn't attract some of these businesses from out of state. And I think we can't forget about the role that renewable energy plays in attracting those businesses like Tesla, like some other companies that want to focus on renewable energy. So we have to have that as an option, and we need to make sure that we have a level playing field with all of our energy sector businesses. So I am looking forward to passing legislation that will attract those businesses as well.
Okay, we're on our last question for sure. Okay, Katie, one more, and then I'll turn it over to Mike.
Last question from me.
Okay.
We would like to know if public safety districts will be a priority to pass this year.
Senator Treat?
Pro Tem.
Yeah.
I've got one vote out of 48. So to ask if it's a priority is a real question. I think there's support in the 2 metro areas for that, but there is concern with groups like the Farm Bureau and others that are large property taxpayers about, do we open this up? There's also some concern in my caucus about what precedent does this set as a use of property tax. Now, I have been supportive in the past, but I've been in the minority in my caucus on that. I believe that cities in Oklahoma are at a disadvantage compared to their counterparts in other states because the reliance exclusively on sales tax. So I'm open to the discussion, but whether or not it gets all the way to the finish line is unknown at this point.
Great. Thank you for those comments. And this has been really productive. Personally, I sure appreciate your work. I know it's a long haul, but stay with it. We sure appreciate you. And I'm going to turn it over to Mike. One last question. And thanks, Mike, for taking it.
Thank you. Thank you, David Stewart. You're a great host. We appreciate that. And this really will be a question for all 4 of our panelists. And the Tulsa Chamber is advocating for a major federal infrastructure bill in this session of Congress. In the past, state legislatures have had significant influence over where federal infrastructure package dollars go. As we work with the Oklahoma congressional delegation to pass an infrastructure bill, how can we best work with state legislative leaders to prioritize needed infrastructure projects? Certainly from our perspective, obviously in our 20 county Northeast Oklahoma region, but really across the state. In your mind, what is the best way for locals, the federal delegation and state legislative leaders to collaborate on such a package that I would predict that our new president and this new Congress will in all likelihood pass in the coming months? Mr. Speaker, can we start with you?
You bet, Mike. Happy to go first on that one. We love infrastructure in the state of Oklahoma. It's very, very vital and necessary. Not just the maintenance monies, but the expansion for our growing state. There's a lot more commerce flowing through our state than normal. I think you see overwhelmingly in a bipartisan manner in the Oklahoma House that would support an infrastructure package. Roads and bridges have been very, very important to the House majority party over the last 15 years, and it's great to finally see us catch up on a lot of deferred maintenance. Our road and bridge structure in the state of Oklahoma is healthy and as good as any other states. We're in the top, among the very top among all the other states in that area. But we've got a great amount of economic development and growth going on. We're going to see in the Tulsa, Oklahoma City areas, very impressive. The investments have been made there. We will see, I think the census data will support that, the fastest growth is taking place in the urban areas. However, you have pockets throughout the state in the rural areas that have a significant growth, and the infrastructure needs to be improved. Overall, for the state of Oklahoma, one of the things that I hope that we are really paying attention to are the I-35 corridor and the US 75-69 corridor coming out of Texas. Those corridors, especially on the 69-75 alignment, it would be the 75 alignment in Texas, and then converting to 69 north at about my hometown of Atoka. But you have eight lanes coming out of throughput coming out of Texas. They're going to bring that to the Red River, and Oklahoma has got to get a plan to position itself to increase its capacity on its highway infrastructure. If we don't do that, and we're not prepared to meet that, we're going to see new corridors emerge that will bypass our state, and that should be a concern for all of us, no matter where we live in the state of Oklahoma.
Thank you, Speaker Mccall. Leader Virgin.
Yeah, I think that, and this may be a fairly obvious answer, but I think that having those projects and those fiscal costs are going to be really important when we advocate for our state share, saying exactly what we do with that money and what those projects will cost. And of course, the economic impact of those will be probably the most important thing in terms of lobbying Congress for our state share.
Thank you, Leader Virgin. Pro Tem Treat.
I think as far as economic development, that the state of Oklahoma can be involved any government level. The number one thing you can do to drive economic development is investing in infrastructure. And so utilizing our relationships on the federal side will be important. I have Senator Standridge as my chair on the Policy Committee on Transportation, and Senator Haste from Tulsa area is my subcommittee chair. And so those are key people to be talking in this relationship, as well as Senator Roger Thompson and his vice chair, Chuck Hall. But I'm in constant communication with our congressional delegation, either through staff or through the members themselves. They obviously have put Oklahoma at the forefront. We used to be much lower on the scale of the money we receive back on transportation, much thanks to Senator Inhofe for his work there. But the way you can kill economic development is to not keep up on infrastructure, and the way you can accelerate economic development is to invest in infrastructure. And you will see me be a strong advocate for all areas of the state to get the investment they need to continue their economic development.
Thank you, Pro Tem Treat. Leader Floyd.
Thank you. Regarding the infrastructure bill, whenever federal dollars come into the state, we know that the state and local governments are going to be involved in how that money is spent and administering those funds. So it's critical that the legislature be part of the discussion to ensure that the money's going where it needs to go and it's going there in the proper fashion. We had a situation just last week where a soon to be released loft report is going to come out, and there are some concerns that perhaps the federal monies that came into the state weren't administered properly. by the executive branch. So it just punctuates how critical it is that we make sure that we work together with our congressional delegation and continue to do what we need to do and follow the guidelines so that they will feel safe and they will be able to continue to give us money to improve our infrastructure. So we've got to play by the rules if we expect the money to keep coming to Oklahoma to support our infrastructure.
Thank you, Leader Floyd. As a many years ago, a former congressional staff member, and now having a daughter who is a congressional staff member for one of the senators. This infrastructure bill, I think, as you've all said, certainly as Speaker Mccall referenced in the very beginning, is really something that Republicans and Democrats can come together on, because infrastructure is about economic development, as you all said, which is about jobs for Oklahomans and for citizens all over the state. And so we look forward to working with each of you and your parties and your members in the months ahead as we see what's happening on the federal front in this regard. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please all join me in thanking House Speaker Charles Mccall, House Minority Leader Emily Virgin, Senate President Pro Tem Greg Treat, and Senate Minority Leader Kay Floyd for taking time out of their busy schedules on a very cold, somewhat slippery Friday morning. And again, I want to thank my good friend David Stewart from the Mid-America Industrial Park for moderating today's discussion.
Thanks, David.
We can't have a chamber event without sponsors. And so thank you to our presenting sponsors, the George Kaiser Family Foundation, One Gas, Osteopathic Founders Foundation, and TTCU Federal Credit Union for your generous support of our programming. Anyone who came in late, called in by phone, or would like to share this webinar, a recording will be posted on the Chamber's YouTube account. Our second of 3 legislative briefing breakfasts this year will be on Friday, April the 30th. Please mark your calendars for that. You can register at tulsachamber.com/events for that, as well as all other upcoming chamber events. If we can help you or your company in any form or fashion, please feel free to reach out to me personally. Please feel free to reach out to any member of our team. We appreciate you being with us. Hope you all have a safe weekend, a warm weekend, and try to be careful with what is forecasted to be potentially very heavy snow and very frigid weather. So stay warm. If you need a personal escort anywhere, John Weisskiver is available in his 8-wheel drive vehicle to help get you around. So thank you all. Have a fabulous weekend. Thanks.
Thank you, and be safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.